My name is Ruth Calloway. I turned 64 last March, and my daughter sent me a grocery store cake with pink frosting because she lives in Portland and couldn't make it down to Atlanta. I told her the cake was delicious. It wasn't, but that's the kind of thing you say when you love someone and you're trying not to make them feel guilty for having their own life. I had worked 31 years as a pharmacy technician at a CVS off Peachtree Industrial. Not glamorous work, but honest work. I knew the names of medications that most people can't pronounce. I knew which generics were just as good as the brand names, and I knew the regulars. Mr. Hicks, who took metformin for his diabetes and always asked me about my grandkids even before I had any, and Mrs. Nissen, Abernathy, who came in every third Monday for her blood pressure prescription and smelled like lavender soap. That kind of work changes you. You see people at their most vulnerable. You learn to be careful with them. My husband Gerald passed 4 years ago. Heart attack. He was in the garage fixing his lawnmower, and by the time I found him, it was already over. We had been married 38 years. I'm not going to say it broke me because Gerald would have hated that. He used to say, "Ruth, you were standing before I got here, and you'll be standing when I'm gone." So I stood. But I won't pretend it was easy. After Gerald passed, I couldn't justify staying in our house in Decatur. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard I couldn't maintain on my own. My son helped me move into a smaller place. A 2-bedroom apartment in a mid-rise building in Sandy Springs. Decent neighborhood, reasonable rent, elevator that mostly worked. The building was called Birchwood Commons, which sounded more elegant than it was. But it was safe, and the walls were thick enough that I didn't hear my neighbor's television, and there was a security desk in the lobby that made me feel like someone was watching out for us. I retired from CVS 2 years after Gerald died. My knees had been protesting for a while, and the evening shifts were getting harder. But a retired woman with a pension, Social Security, and too much quiet in her apartment discovers something quickly. The silence is the hardest part. Not the finances. Not the logistics, the silence. So I started baking. I had always baked on holidays and for church potlucks. But after I retired, baking became my structure. Monday was banana bread. Wednesday was oatmeal cookies or sometimes a simple pound cake. Friday was whatever I felt like. Sometimes a peach cobbler, sometimes dinner rolls, sometimes the lemon bars my late sister Margaret used to love. The man at the security desk on the ground floor was named Theodore Webb. He was in his mid-40s, tall with close-cropped grey at his temples and reading glasses he always had to take off quickly when anyone approached the desk, like he was embarrassed to be caught wearing them. He worked the evening shift, 5 to midnight, 4 nights a week. He was always polite, always said, "Good evening, Miss Calloway," when I came through the lobby, even when I was just going to check the mail. I don't know exactly when it started. I think it was a Wednesday, about 3 months after I moved in. I had made a double batch of oatmeal cookies, and there was more than I could eat. And I walked past the lobby on my way to drop something in the recycling bin, and Theodore was sitting at that desk with a paper coffee cup that looked like it had been cold for hours. I left 6 cookies in a napkin next to his keyboard. Just left them there. Didn't make a big deal of it. He thanked me the next morning when I was getting my mail. Said they were the best cookies he'd had in years. I told him that was a low bar to clear if he'd been getting his cookies from a vending machine, and he laughed. He had a good laugh. The kind that came from somewhere real. After that, Fridays became our thing. I'd bring something down, whatever I'd made that week, and leave it at the desk. I never stayed long. We weren't friends exactly. More like neighbors who understood each other without needing a lot of words. He'd ask how my week was. I'd ask about his. I knew he had a daughter, Camille, who was 17 and lived with her mother in Marietta. I knew he was trying to save enough to help pay for her college. I knew he read crime novels when the lobby was quiet. That was about all I knew. I didn't pry. I want to be honest here. Part of why I kept bringing the baked goods was selfish. It gave me somewhere to be on Friday evenings. It gave me a reason to finish whatever I was making instead of eating half of it and putting the rest in the trash. It made me feel like I was part of something, even if that something was just a small exchange in a lobby that smelled like cleaning solution and carpet. I never expected it to matter the way it did. This past November, I had a follow-up appointment with my cardiologist. Nothing serious, just monitoring a mild arrhythmia that showed up in a routine checkup the year before. My cardiologist, a younger woman with an office over near Northside Hospital, told me everything looked stable and to keep taking my magnesium and try to manage my stress. I told her I lived alone and mostly baked. She said that sounded ideal. I got back to Birchwood Commons around 7:30 that evening. It was already dark. The parking structure attached to our building was 3 levels, and I was on the second level because the first had been full when I'd left that afternoon. The elevator in the parking structure was out of service. It had been flickering for a week and had finally given up entirely, so I took the stairwell. Concrete stairs, fluorescent lights, the kind of place that echoes. I was halfway up to the second level when I heard it. Footsteps behind me, coming in fast. I turned, and there was a man I didn't recognize. Young, maybe late 20s, hood up, moving with a kind of focused urgency that made the hair on my arms stand up. I gripped my purse. My keys were in my hand. I knew enough to know that if I ran, I wouldn't get far. "My knees weren't what they used to be," he said. "Just give me the purse." Not loud. Almost conversational, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I am not proud of what I felt in that moment. I felt small and stupid and 64 years old, and I thought about Gerald, which I know sounds strange, but I thought, I wish you were here. Not to save me, just to be here. I gave him the purse. He grabbed it and went back down the stairs. I stood there for a moment, hands shaking, keys still in my fist. I made it up to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and just breathed. I didn't cry until I got to my apartment, and then I sat at my kitchen table and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in a long time. I filed a police report that night. The responding officer was kind enough, took notes, gave me a case number. He told me to cancel my cards and check my credit. I told him I knew what to do. I had worked in a pharmacy for 31 years. I had handled worse surprises than this, just slower ones. What was in the purse? My wallet, which had about $40 in cash, my debit card, one credit card, my insurance cards, my CVS Extra Care card, a tube of hand lotion, and a small photo I kept folded in the bill section. Gerald at Lake Lanier, summer of 2015, squinting into the sun and holding up a bream he'd caught that was comically small. That was the thing I grieved most. The $40 I could replace. The photo I could not. The next Friday, I almost didn't bake. I didn't feel much like it, but by 3 in the afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen anyway, making a batch of brown butter snickerdoodles, because when I'm sad and don't know what to do with my hands, I bake. That's just the truth. I brought a plate down to the lobby around 6. Theodore was at the desk, glasses on, reading something on his computer. He looked up when he heard the elevator open. He must have seen something in my face, because he took his glasses off slowly and said, "Miss Calloway, you all right?" I told him what had happened. I hadn't told anyone yet. I'd called my son to cancel my credit card, but hadn't told him the full story because I didn't want him to insist I move again. Theodore listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. You shouldn't have been alone in that stairwell." It wasn't dramatic, but something about the way he said it. Not pitying, just stating a fact, like my safety was a reasonable expectation that had been violated, made me feel less foolish than I'd been feeling for 3 days. He asked me to describe the man. I did. He asked what time, what level, which stairwell. I told him. He wrote it down on a notepad, without explanation. I didn't think much of it. I thanked him and went back upstairs. The following Wednesday, I ran into a woman from the fourth floor. Patrice, a nurse who worked nights at Piedmont, at the mailboxes. She told me there had been 2 other incidents in the parking structure over the past 6 weeks. One woman on the 3rd floor had her car broken into. Another woman, a younger resident I didn't know, had been followed from her car to the elevator, and the man had only backed off when she started screaming. Neither of them had filed a report with building management. They'd just been scared and stayed quiet. I felt something shift in me when Patrice told me that. A specific kind of anger that I hadn't felt in a while. Not hot anger. A slow, certain kind. I went back downstairs that evening and knocked on the security desk. Theodore was on. I told him what Patrice had told me. He didn't look surprised. He said, "I know. I've been tracking it." He turned his monitor toward me. He had a spreadsheet, dates, times, locations within the parking structure, physical descriptions from the few residents who had mentioned things to him. He said he sent a formal request to building management 3 weeks ago, asking to review the parking structure camera footage and requesting a maintenance check on the stairwell lighting. He hadn't heard back. I asked him what I could do. He said, "Write a formal letter. Management responds to paper. They don't always respond to me." I told him I'd spent 31 years writing pharmacy documentation. I knew how to write something that got read. I went upstairs and I wrote a letter that night, 2 pages, single-spaced. I documented the dates, described the incidents, noted the broken elevator and the inadequate lighting, cited the relevant section of the Georgia Landlord-Tenant Code regarding common area safety, and included a line about the potential liability if a resident was seriously harmed in a space that management had been notified about and failed to address. I printed it, signed it, and slid a copy under the building manager's office door. I mailed a second copy certified mail to the property management company's corporate address, which I found in 30 seconds on their website. I heard back within 4 days. Not from the building manager, from the property management company's regional director. He called my cell phone and was very professional and very careful and said all the right things. A security audit had been commissioned. Additional cameras would be installed in the parking structure. The stairwell lighting on all 3 levels was being replaced within the week. They would also be working with a local precinct to increase patrol presence in the area. He thanked me for bringing it to their attention. I told him I wasn't the one he should be thanking. What happened after that took a few more weeks, but it happened. A man matching the description I'd given Theodore, and that Theodore had been tracking for 6 weeks, was identified on the newly installed parking structure cameras at a neighboring apartment complex. He was connected to a string of similar incidents across Sandy Springs and Dunwoody. The detective who called me said my letter and Theodore's documentation had been part of what helped establish the pattern. I'm not telling you this because I think I did something heroic. I wrote a letter. Theodore kept a spreadsheet. Patrice told me what she knew instead of staying silent. None of that is heroic. It's just what you do when you decide that being scared isn't the same as being helpless. The photo of Gerald at Lake Lanier. I never got back. I spent an evening going through old files on my laptop looking for a copy and found one. Same trip, different frame. Gerald holding the same ridiculous fish and this time looking directly at the camera with that expression he had when he was proud of himself, for no good reason. I printed it at Walgreens. It's in my wallet now. There's a part of this story I've been thinking about how to tell. About 2 weeks after the man was identified and the case was being built, Theodore came up to my floor. He knocked. He had never done that before. I opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway in his regular clothes, not his uniform, holding his reading glasses in one hand, in that way he had when he was uncertain. He apologized for coming by unannounced. I told him not to be ridiculous and put on coffee. We sat at my kitchen table and talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about Camille, how when she was 12, he and her mother had a bad year, and then a worse year, and by the time Camille was 14, they were divorced and he had moved into a studio in Chambly. He said Camille had barely spoken to him for 2 years. He'd been trying to rebuild things slowly. He went to her soccer games and sat in the back. He texted her, and sometimes she responded, and sometimes she responded, and sometimes she didn't. He was saving for her college because he felt like it was something concrete he could do, when he didn't know how to be in the same room with her, without either one of them saying the wrong thing. I told him about my daughter and the grocery store cake. He laughed. I told him about my daughter and the grocery store cake. He laughed. I told him about Gerald. He listened the way some people listen, where you can tell they're not waiting to talk, they're actually hearing you. Before he left, he said something I've thought about since. He said, "You know what I noticed? Every time you came down with something, you never made it awkward. You never stayed too long. You just left it and went back upstairs. That's a rare thing." He paused. "My ex-wife used to say I didn't know how to let people help me. I've been thinking about that lately. I didn't know what to say to that exactly. I said, 'You let me write the letter. That counts.'" He smiled, put his glasses on, said good night. The week after that, he told me Camille had texted him to ask if they could get dinner before her spring semester started. Just the two of them. He showed me the text like it was evidence of something, which I suppose it was. I told him to take her somewhere nice. Not too nice. Somewhere she wouldn't feel like he was trying too hard. He asked if I had suggestions. I told him Houston's on Peachtree if he wanted comfortable and reliably good. He said that sounded right. I still bake on Fridays. I still bring something down to the lobby. The man at the desk now is a younger guy named Andre, who I am still getting to know. Theodore moved to a day position at a building in Buckhead, which has better hours and means he can go to more of Camille's soccer games. I'm happy for him. I miss the conversation, but I'm happy for him. People ask me sometimes, my son mostly, occasionally my daughter when she calls, whether I'm lonely. I think they expect me to say no, because I'm the kind of woman who says no. But the honest answer is, sometimes, mornings are the quietest. Sunday afternoons. The 10 minutes after I finish baking something and the apartment smells warm and there's no one to offer the first piece to. But loneliness isn't the same as being alone, and being alone isn't the same as being without people. I have Patrice on the 4th floor who tells me about her nights at the hospital in a way that makes me miss the pharmacy. I have Andre at the desk who is learning that I will bring cookies whether he wants them or not. I have my son who calls on Sunday nights and my daughter who sends imperfect cakes from Portland and means every bit of them. I have a photo of Gerald in my wallet looking ridiculous and happy at a lake in the summer, and I have the memory of the way he said my name, which I can still hear when I need to. I am not helpless. I am 64 years old with a bad knee and a documented arrhythmia and a list of things I've survived that I do not recite out loud because I don't need to. Gerald already knew, and I know, and some Friday evenings when I'm standing in my kitchen rolling dough and the light is coming through the window at that specific angle, that means the day isn't over yet, I think I am still standing. Just like he said. Be kind without keeping score. Pay attention to the people who are easy to overlook. And if something is wrong, write the letter. Don't wait for someone else to do it. That's all I've got. That's enough. I've been thinking about what actually happened that November, and I don't mean the parking structure, I mean the longer thing. The sequence that started years before I ever moved into Birchwood Commons. When Gerald died, I had a choice that most people in grief don't name out loud, but make anyway. You can turn inward and stay there. A lot of people do, and I don't judge them. Loss is heavy, and the world doesn't exactly rush to make room for it. Or you can keep your hands moving, keep showing up for the small things, even when the small things feel pointless. I chose the second one, not because I'm particularly wise, but because I didn't know what else to do with a Tuesday afternoon and too many oatmeal cookies. That choice, quiet, habitual, not heroic at all, is what put me in Theodore's lobby every Friday. And Theodore, because someone had been decent to him consistently without asking for anything back, paid attention when it mattered. He kept that spreadsheet. He noticed what building management had chosen not to notice. He said something when I came downstairs looking like I'd been hollowed out. None of that happens if we're strangers who've never exchanged more than a nod. I think people misunderstand cause and effect when it comes to kindness. They treat it like a transaction. You do something good returns to you, balanced like a ledger. That's not how it works. What actually happens is slower and less neat. Kindness builds a kind of infrastructure. It creates the conditions for people to see each other clearly, to speak honestly, to act when action is needed. You don't know in advance which relationship will matter, or when, or how. You just keep building. Theodore was trying to rebuild something with Camille through pure will and saved money and showing up to soccer games where she barely acknowledged him. What shifted things wasn't a grand gesture. It was that Camille saw, eventually, that her father was the kind of man who noticed when a 64-year-old widow came downstairs looking frightened and did something about it. Character shows up in small moments before it shows up in large ones. She was watching. Kids always are. The mugger took $40 and a photo I loved. What he couldn't take, and this is not sentiment, this is practical fact, was the network of small, honest connections that meant I didn't have to fight that situation alone. Patrice told me what she knew instead of keeping quiet. Theodore had already been working the problem for weeks. I knew how to write a letter because I'd spent a lifetime in a job that required precision and documentation. All of it converged. That's what resilience actually looks like, I think. Not one strong person standing alone, a web of people who have been paying attention to each other, who have practiced small acts of decency long enough that they do it without thinking, and who show up when it counts, not because they're called to heroism, but because it's just what you do for someone you've been bringing cookies to on Fridays. I'm 64. My knee aches in the cold. I have a heart that needs monitoring, and a daughter in Portland, and a son who worries more than he lets on. I am not a remarkable person, but I have never stopped showing up, and I have never stopped paying attention, and I have never once believed that getting older meant becoming someone the world no longer needed to reckon with. Gerald was right. I was standing before he got here. I'll be standing when this is all over. Keep your hands moving. Pay attention to the people right in front of you. And when something is wrong, don't wait for someone else to write the letter.